He loved nature, he loved trees, he loved deer, he loved birds, snakes. He's a very nature guy, but he was not mechanical. So that when they gave him jobs that were mechanical, he struggled. He could not drive to save his life. They didn't let him drive after a while, especially after one incident where he rode this Jeep and he was all off the road half the time. When he died of electrocution after a shower. He was on a terrazzo floor. His feet are wet. And he turned on an electric fan, you know, the old kind, standing, tall electric fan. It had faulty wiring. When he turned it on, it electrocuted and he fell down and the fan fell down on him. Well, now this is how he died, but this relates to the story in the 40s and 50s. Father Matthew, one of the brothers and one of the brothers under him, said when Merton died, a few days later, he said, well, it figures he would die that way. He was such a clumsy person. Now, this was not sacrilegious or disrespectful. I mean, he loved this man. He cried like a baby. But there's a sense of humor in a monastic house. And you probably leave house to house, it changes. But in a monastic house, there's a sense of humor, such as when you're walking in a cemetery and I heard a woman one time say, oh, I hate to walk in the cemetery over these people, that these poor souls that died. And the monk that was walking with her, there's nobody down there. So they have a kind of monastic humor that can strike you as very sarcastic. But they're really not thinking in a material kind of way the way we are thinking. So that it's not they're being irreverent, or that Father Matthew was when he commented on, well, it seems like he would probably, if he's going to die, it's probably going to be some kind of mechanical mishap because he was so clumsy. That was his way of kind of paying triple. Kind of, you remember Don Rickles and his comic routines? That's kind of the way Father Matthew was. It was his way of paying respect. So what became Merton's primary task was writing. The abbot that was in charge when he got there, not Dom Fox, who most of us are somewhat familiar with, if you're familiar with Merton's story, but the earlier abbot, whose name escapes me at the moment, saw in Merton a gift of writing, and he said, why don't you write your autobiography? And why don't you also, as a job, because you know language, he'd studied a bunch of languages. He spoke maybe 12 languages and wrote in maybe 15 languages, can read in them. So he was multilingual. And part of his love of language just kind of just filtered on, and he just kept learning. He was learning Japanese when he died. He was learning Russian when he was, because he wanted to correspond with anybody who was from Japan or anybody who was from Russia. He wanted to communicate because he was wide open. So he was given the task of writing, and one of the first little jobs he was given was read the old French text of our order and translate them into modern English so our brothers who don't read French could read where we came from. And then he started translating other, what we call the mystics. And he started reading all of these contemplatives, which we call contemplative now, but they weren't necessarily calling them that in the 40s. And he started to discover what the tradition was all about. He came into the monastery thinking it was one way, and he had not heard about contemplation. And then he started learning. He was awakening by force of vocation and work. What is this all about? And he really thought through it. So when he read these works and he would translate them, put them in words, he put them in his words and in words of the 1940s and 50s for his brothers to be able to understand. He wrote in-house documents with it, not his name on it. And it was just what these other people said as he would try to explain. So they gave him the task of sort of rediscovering the tradition of the order, which sent him back all the way back to the beginning. And you know, before Vatican II, there was a lot of push to get back to the sources, get back to the beginning. Where did the church go wrong? Where do we need to get back to? What's the foundation for things? Of course, he would track this all the way back to God, and this is what would become of contemplation. There's a little handout here, don't turn to it, but there's a handout about the books that Merton wrote specifically about contemplation. It started early. He's starting to think about what is this that we do as spiritual beings. We contemplate. What is contemplation? Who wrote about this? Who knows about this? He goes back in the tradition and he finds all these people writing about contemplative prayer, contemplative life. Then he starts opening up to people in all kinds of countries and other traditions, other cultures. They're contemplating. Buddhists in Asian cultures will use the word meditation for what we use as contemplation. But as Christians, we also have meditation, but it's usually a more wordy kind of thing, but it could be a thought type of meditation. We can use these words interchangeably and kind of as opposed to each other. But Merton started to he was just tracking contemplation. And what is it he's doing when he's contemplating? What do other people do when they're contemplating? Who is contemplating? Please tell me so I can go talk to them and find out how they're doing this. Kind of relates to the question a little earlier. How do you contemplate? There doesn't seem to be this one way to do it. It's just whatever you need to do to get there. And you're contemplating the depth. So not to be facetious, but let's say the ocean is deep. Then we know it is. We haven't been to the bottom of it still after all these centuries. We don't know. There's still species way down there. We don't know what they are. We just assume they are because we're not down there and we can't see them. But there's all kinds of ways to get into the ocean. I mean, you dropped out of a plane. You can take a little boat out, a little excursion, and hop over with some flippers and your own fins and a mask. You can start on the beach and just start walking out. There's all kinds of ways to get into that ocean, but that's the depth. If you're looking for the depth, you're contemplating, and the depth is reality. And if reality is in existence because of God's life, you're contemplating God's life, and you're trying to get to the depth of God's life. And it's all completely in you. It's not limited to you, but we're bubbling over with it. We're going down inside ourselves into the interior. That's our means. That's our method. That's how we tap into the life in which we are in. So you think of that plumb line. We got to go through something to get down there, but we're dropping in. The Orthodox Christians have, if you've ever read the Philokalia, is anybody familiar with that? 4-volume set in English? Well, it's hard to get now because it's kind of out of print. Volume 1 is still around, so you get a hold of this. This is the other side of the Catholic Church. 1,000 years we were all together. Well, in the late 1700s, some Orthodox Christians compiled from the 4th to the 16th century, I think, all the texts on contemplation, all the texts on interior prayer, interior life. We've got 4 volumes in English. The 5th volume is pending. The last writer-translator is the head of the Orthodox Church in England, Callistos Ware. It's a beautiful series of books. All these monks, some of them you've heard, Evagrius, if you know about desert wisdom and those monks. So it's our Greek contemplative tradition all put together in the late 1790s or early 1790s. Well, they have this phrase they're the ones who teach the Jesus prayer, which is very similar to a centering prayer, where you just say, basically, Lord, have mercy, I'm a sinner. It's like embracing reality. It's facing yourself. It's admitting, no pretense. Something about clearing ourselves, no pretense, going down, being quiet. That becomes like a kind of mantra when you say that prayer and over, where you just say the word Jesus, and then like we were saying love earlier, and then you just sort of melt into this depth. Well, they have another phrase. I just think this is absolutely beautiful. It's a little more of the 19th century Orthodox monks who would teach this, and they would teach, let the mind drop into the heart. Now, if you think of that plumb again, that plumb line, at the top is the mind. The mind's got to go down through that commotion, and it's got to go all the way down into the heart. It drops into it like it's like a rock into the ocean. It is to me, it's one of the most beautiful phrasings or descriptions of prayer. But you got to go all the way down, which we're going to come to. We're going to come to the Merton's poem. You got to go all the way down. You got to go all the way through something and get down there. But that's like into the depths of what undergirds us, our very life. This is what Merton is doing. He rediscovers the monastic tradition, the Christian Catholic tradition. He discovers the Orthodox Church, all because he's translating other works, and then he starts to write his own. As his own life starts to force him into speaking for himself. And then the abbot says, go ahead, write your stuff. Not many people were really publishing as monks. It just wasn't one of the jobs, but it became Merton's task. But here's the most amazing thing. We're going to read something if you want to start turning to the blue page. A monk's life is very regulated. So he wrote a ton of things, but he only had a couple hours a day to do it. This included all the correspondence, and there's like 5 volumes. It'd be a stack this high of letters, and they still got 13 to 16,000 letters they haven't published. But all these letters that he wrote to everybody, Jackie Onassis, Boris Pasternak, he wrote everybody, and they wrote back. They were glad to hear from him. But he does all this writing in a small span of time each day. He writes, and then he does some other things. Sometimes he would cook, sometimes he'd go plant some trees, drive the Jeep, watch out for fire, do some other kinds of things. But he didn't write all day long. He didn't have a privileged writing lifestyle. Not till the end, when he was given clearance to be a hermit for a while. He still had to come back to the house and pray with the brothers, attend church. He was still part of the community. But he was given a little bit extra time, and he kind of needed that. But for the longest period, 20 years, he only had a little window of time to write. And then this amazing outpouring of words came from him. It was like a flood out of his soul. The whole time he's uncovering this tradition, he's uncovering his own soul. And this flood, almost like an ocean, starts to pulse through him. And this is the work of breaking through. Let's look at what he says about this. I'm on the blue sheet, Conference 2, Breakthrough. These are words from Thoughts in Solitude again. All good meditative prayer is a conversion of our entire self to God. Let me just stop there for a second. If you can sense what I was saying as I'm trying to present what he's kind of going through a tumultuous period of writing and an unearthing. And he has experienced a total conversion of himself. Not just, oh, so this is what you guys do here. I'm kind of new to the monastery. In fact, I'm new to Catholicism and religious life. But now I'm in it, and I thought it was like this. And it turns out he's not learning it from the place. He's not being taught this. He's not in formation getting this. He's learning it through his own existence as he is tackling and embracing the order and the things that people weren't reading because they couldn't read those things. And all of this he's putting together, thought and life, life and thought. He's being converted, continually converted and opened. One cannot enter into meditation in this sense, in this entire conversion sense, without a kind of inner upheaval. By upheaval, I do not mean a disturbance, but a breaking out of routine, a liberation of the heart from the cares and preoccupations of one's daily business. The reason why so few people apply themselves seriously to mental prayer, quiet prayer, silent prayer, is precisely that this inner upheaval is necessary, and they are usually incapable of the effort required to make it. It may be that they lack generosity. It may also be that they lack direction and experience and go about it in the wrong way. They disturb themselves. They throw themselves into agitation by the violent efforts they make to get recollected. And finally, they end in hopelessness. They compromise in the end by a series of frustrated routines which help them to pass the time, or else they relax into a state of semi-coma of contemplation. But there's not many contemplatives that write about that. I mean, you have to know this. You have to experience how you faked yourself out. And it was easy for Merton he's not a monk. So now I'm with these monks, and so I'm doing the monk thing, and it's not necessarily working out. Well, what should I be doing? What's the real thing? He starts to experience the real thing, and it just blows apart the structures, which are not bad, but the thing is not in those structures. It's in that wind blowing through that open room. It would be the death of him to compromise with reality and go for something short. And so he's claiming here, he's not being hard on us or on the world that we live in, if you read the rest of the context here. He realizes this is hard for people. In fact, this is almost impossible for people to break through the upheaval or to experience the upheaval because we tend to maintain control of our life. Well, you have to laugh at yourself. I mean, you can't do it. You can't control your, I'm starting to feel reckless. I'm going to just say some things. I'm going to blurt it out. You can't control your life. You can't control your kids. You can't control America. You can't control Obama. You can't control health care. You can't control this. You cannot control me at this point because now I'm losing it. You have no power to do it. But this is what we do almost 99.5% of the day is we determine our life. We make our plans. We set our schedule. Well, how else can you live? Well, we don't know because that's all we know to do.